Hi, I'm Scott from the Rio Grande Tech Team, and today I'm going to be talking about adding supports to your models for 3D printing to ensure that you get a complete print every time. So let's get started. Okay, so today we're going to be doing our demonstration on adding supports using PreForm, which is the software that comes with the printers from Formlabs. It has some very good visual aid elements that we're going to be using to demonstrate where to add supports and why. But if you are using another printer from a different company, we are going to be covering lots of theory on where to add supports and why. So if you don't have a Formlabs printer, this video could also be a benefit on where to add supports. Very briefly, let's go over what's happening during the 3D printing process, just so we get an idea. So I've made a very crude 3D model of what's going on here. So at the top is our build platform. Now our build platform is where our models are going to be attached. Below that we have our resin tray, and then we have our liquid resin down here. Now inside your printer is going to be a light source. In this case represented by this very rudimentary flashlight. Chances are you do not have a flashlight in your 3D printer, but most printers are going to be usually one of three things. So the first would be SLA, or a laser. A laser is when it's actually drawing an outline of the layer, it's filling it in with cross-hatching, and then that's how it actually prints the layers. The second is referred to as DLP. It's more like a TV projector inside the printer that's actually shining light up. And the third would be, more recently, these printers have started to come onto the market, LCD. Now they are using LCD screens to provide the necessary light to cure this liquid resin because it reacts to UV light and hardens. So we're able to print things layer by layer. Now underneath this tray is actually a transparent film, see? And that's what allows the light to come through. So what will happen is this build platform will lower down, the light will come from the bottom, it will cure that layer, and then the platform will raise up, allow fresh resin to flow underneath, and then it will lower back down to the next layer. And it does that over and over and over and over and over again until it extrudes the full piece basically out of the liquid resin. So the reason why we need supports is because we need this to stay connected to the build platform at all times. So you can see my kind of half printed model here. So I have a foundation here at the bottom, and I've also got supports. Every layer that prints has to be lifted up off the platform to allow the next layer to be printed. So the supports are what's actually going to lift this piece out of this liquid resin so it can print the next layer. So having this contact with the build platform is extremely important. So you're going to be hearing things like surface area. So the foundation here having enough surface area to stay on this platform and having the supports in the right areas. So let's go back to PreForm, and we're going to start with this model here. This was an umbrella that I threw together. Now this umbrella actually demonstrates really well the importance of supports. So remember I said we needed to have this model and every part of it in constant contact with the build platform. So one of the nice parts about PreForm is that we have this little slider bar over here that's going to allow us to see those layers as it's printing. So we can just click and drag and start dragging this up. Now we're starting at layer 1. It's actually listing what layer that is. And right now the bottom of our handle here is in contact with the build platform. So that would be the first layer that prints. And then as it comes up, it's printing each subsequent layer. Everything is printing fine because we still have this handle attached to the build platform. But watch what happens when we get closer to the umbrella. You start to see this. these little islands that pop up on the outside from the base of the umbrella. So once it starts to print these layers out here, right now we don't have anything that's going to be able to pick these up out of the resin tray and lift them up so they can print the next layer. So these are the kinds of areas where we would want to add supports. You'll commonly hear them referred to as overhangs. And as I go up, this piece is still separate from this handle, but eventually they come together right about there, and then everything is one piece. Right away, we know that at the base of each one of these, we would need to add a support. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. So over here on the left is our support area. So I'm going to click on my umbrella to highlight it and open up the supports. A lot of support generators, this one included, does have the ability to do automatic supports. So that's what this button is right here. Now, automatic supports in these types of programs are using an algorithm to know where those supports should be. Typically, they will go much farther than they need to. They will add a lot more supports than is required, and that's mainly for safety reasons, but we can actually click on it just to see what it does. So I'll go ahead and click auto generate selected, and you can see it's really just kind of adding them all over the place. Now, because we make jewelry, we have to be able to clean this up and make it look nice and polish it if required. So sometimes these extra supports, even though they're going to guarantee that this piece will print, aren't 100% necessary. So let's do just a very rudimentary support on this model. So I'm going to go ahead and click clear, and I'm going to get rid of those. And I'm going to go into edit so I can add my own models. Now let me bring this slider back down so we can see it. So right now you'll see that the entire model has turned red, and that's because it's telling us what areas we may need more supports. So I'm definitely going to need one on this very first layer that prints. So I'm going to go ahead and click right in that area. And now we know that we need them on the bottom of these areas of the umbrella. So I'm going to click on those as well. And you can see the red is disappearing from those areas as I add supports. So this would be the most rudimentary supports, just in these areas. And in PreForm, when you're adding supports, you just kind of add these little spheres onto the model. If you mouse over them and they turn red, you can click to make them go away. You can actually use the auto supports and then remove the ones you don't want, or you can just support it yourself. I firmly believe that it is in your interest to learn how to add these supports yourself, because it will make for much less cleanup on your printed models. We can select the touchpoint size. We'll get into the touchpoint size here in just a moment, but for now we're just going to go ahead and click apply. So this would be the most basic amount of supports. And you can see as I mouse over my little slider here, see now it's printing the base, which in this software is called the raft. And right in this middle support here in a sec, we'll see the handle. There it is. So the base of the handle is attached to this support, which is attached to the raft, which is attached to the build platform. And then we get up towards the umbrella. And now you'll see all these little islands that we saw earlier all have a support attached to it. So that as it's printing the subsequent layers, these supports are attached to this outside piece and are actually picking it up off of the window in the tray. And then at the end, we get a complete print. So when we were talking briefly about the kind of printing process, we mentioned a couple things. Surface area. So in PreForm, by default, it will install this raft. So pretty nice, it actually puts the name of the file on the actual print, so that's a nice little addition. But this is quite a bit of resin to use. So you do have the option here under your support settings to actually do a full raft, which is what this is, or mini rafts, which let's go ahead and I will recalculate these real quick. So the mini rafts are kind of like that. They're just adding bits of surface area there. Or you can have none at all. I would not recommend having none. I would recommend at least these mini rafts down here. The full raft is going to be full protection. So the reason why these rafts are important is because I mentioned earlier surface area. Let's say I'm printing my umbrella and I get to about right here. This flat area, this is going to be a layer that's going to be printed. And when you're printing this layer and it lifts up off the build platform, there's a certain amount of suction that's taking place. I will preface this by saying the Form 3 has a brand new system that is used to mitigate this very thing. They call it LFS, or low force stereolithography. This is a way to lessen the peel forces, as they call them, so there's not so much suction generated there. But a lot of the other printers on the market will have to contend with this. When this is pulled off of the window in the bottom of the tray, there's a certain amount of suction. If you don't have enough surface area holding your piece to this build platform, this suction up here could override the surface area down here, and it pulls the entire piece off of your build platform. In those cases, you'll either find them just kind of floating in the resin down there, or it will actually be attached to the bottom of your tray, and you'll have to scrape it out. It will be a failed print. And because we have to deal with these suction forces, not only are we contending with the surface area on the build platform itself, we're also having to consider what PreForm calls the touchpoint size, the diameter of this support right where it contacts your model. So if I'm printing something that's a little larger, and I've got some of these types of layers that maybe have a bit more suction, then if this suction force overrides the force of this support, then it can actually yank the model right off of the supports. Your supports will still be on the build platform, and most likely they will grow like normal, but this will actually, your actual model will be down in the tray somewhere. These are all considerations. In a lot of cases, the defaults for these types of programs will be more than adequate. With the Form 3, currently you can get down to about 0.35, 0.4 for your supports. And of course, that's going to be dependent on the size of your model. If I'm printing a big giant, like a championship ring type piece, then I'm probably going to have a little thicker supports just for a little extra security. So these are all considerations while you're adding your supports on. Make sure to check you have enough surface area on the build platform to keep it there. You've got adequate diameter size or touch point size actually connecting with your model. And make sure you have all the supports in the right place to make sure that these types of little overhangs here are properly supported. And having a little slider like this to actually inspect your model prior to printing is a nice addition. So you can really minimize the supports while making sure that everything is going to come out correctly. Okay, so now we're going to actually move on to the next model. This was a signet ring that I threw together really quick. And this is actually a really good example of these suction forces. So if I do the same thing here and grab my slider and start moving up, when we get to the top of this ring, or the thick part, you'll see how big some of these slice layers can be. I mean, that's a pretty good size. I need to have more beefy supports, larger touch point size, or I just need to have a lot of supports. Either way, that means more cleanup or more resin. Rather than just bombarding this ring with supports, one thing that we can do is adjust the orientation. This is one of the biggest issues with printing that I currently see. You can add supports to a lot of pieces and still not get it to grow right, In most cases, just a change of orientation will take care of those issues, especially if you're seeing kind of weird wavy surfaces on the side of your print. Changing the orientation can be very beneficial. So let's grab this signet ring and let's turn it about like that. Now let's check out our cross sections. So I'm going to click and drag. So still pretty good size, but much smaller than what we were dealing with before. This would actually peel off the bottom of the tray much easier, and you're much less likely to have any kind of print failures. Because we've changed the orientation, we're also going to be changing where the supports go. So if we look at some of the first layers of this ring, so we've got the bottom of the ring shank here, and then we've got this corner out here. These are the areas that we would want to have our very first supports. Now, with something like a corner like this, I could probably get away with adding my supports right along this edge. But if the support actually kind of creeps out over this corner, which you'll see a lot if you're doing auto supports, the auto supports will typically put the touch points right here on this corner, because that is logical to the algorithm to have those supports right there. But since we're making jewelry, we have to redefine that corner, make it look nice, because this corner is not going to have any supports and it's going to look just fine. But this one we'll have to do more cleanup on to make them nice and symmetrical. This orientation may not be ideal for something like this, but if we turn this, let's say we turn it kind of like that, maybe around 45, 50 degrees. So now let's take a look and see what these layers are going to look like. So we're printing the bottom of the ring shank. I'll get that out of the way. And then it starts printing the ring itself, getting a bit of surface area here, but not too bad. And that's pretty good. That's probably about where I would support this. Now, if you have detail all over this outside, then you're going to have to probably change the orientation. You don't want to add supports all over, a really nice detail that you've spent time creating. But in the case of something like this, because I've got smooth sides on here, I can easily put supports on this outside edge and along here. There's lots of area to add the supports that won't take much cleanup. So yeah, if you're having trouble getting a consistent print, or it prints fully and you're still getting some weird surfaces, try a change of orientation. This works especially well with these types of rings. More often than not, you can print it straight up, but just kind of kinking it over maybe 30 degrees or 45 degrees will definitely help if you're having issues after making sure all the supports are where they need to be. And the last one we're going to talk about real quick is a bit more about overhangs and printing flat pieces. So I made this very simple little L-shaped piece here, but this is going to illustrate a couple of things for us. So I'm going to change the orientation real quick. So I'm going to go into the orientation area of PreForm, and I'm going to click Select Base. And I want this base to be facing down, so I'm going to click on that to snap it like that. If we take a look at this one, so we're printing that bottom area, and then as we get into the L-shaped part, you'll see this piece kind of sticking out here. Now, do we need to add supports to that? Because it's actually connected to this, so in a way, it's sort of self-supporting. In this case, the answer would be yes, we do need to add supports to this bottom area, because the way I made this was from this corner to this corner is 7 millimeters, and from this corner to this corner is 5 millimeters. If we had our model oriented something like that, according to Formlabs guidelines, this would be okay, because 5 millimeter overhang is about the max you want to go. Now, I wouldn't recommend making this a habit because you can affect dimensional accuracy of this piece by printing in this fashion. And just keep that in mind. This 7mm would be too long for an overhang. This one would be okay, but you're gambling at that point. If you have to print something with this long an overhang, best to add a support or two underneath just to make sure that everything is going to print okay. Now, I know some of y'all that are already doing 3D printing are saying, why don't you just turn it over on the flat side? So maybe right here or right here. And you'd be 100% right. This is most likely pretty close to the way that I would typically print this. However, you can run into some issues with dimensional accuracy by printing directly on the build platform itself. You can actually get some variation in measurements of this measurement right here. So, and plus, once you print this, you still have to get a tool under this surface to actually remove it. So you can actually deform your model just by trying to get it off of the build platform after you've printed it. If I go back into our support area, and I'm going to go ahead and select this, and I'm going to click on edit so I can add my own supports. And I'm just going to add some supports like that. That should be fine. And PreForm's nice. It gives you a little message saying that your model has been sufficiently supported. And now I can just go ahead and click apply. So technically I could print it like this. However, watch out when you're printing flat pieces like this and you have the bottom perfectly flat and supports all along the bottom. You can get a bit of a wavy surface on this just because it almost creates a bit of filleting around these supports. It will require a bit of cleanup, but it will be a bit more accurate as well. Now, if I really wanted to go and get everything as accurate as possible, I would probably take this and turn it just a hair, just like that. And now I would go back in. I'd place these supports as close to this corner as I possibly could. Maybe some right here. I'm going a bit overboard with these supports, but something like this. Now, because the first layers that are going to be printing are right along this corner, we have supports kind of butted up to that corner as much as we possibly can. And we're not going to leave this bottom surface flat to create that kind of filleting. We've put it on a bit of a gradient, so we're actually going to get a much smoother surface on the bottom, and this entire piece is going to remain much more dimensionally accurate. So that's kind of the gist of our support theory side of it. Everything you've seen me do with going into the support area and clicking edit and using these little balls and the red discoloration to know where those supports are going to be needed. 9 times out of 10, that's all you're going to need. PreForm is very good about picking out those areas where you need supports, and you can actually adjust the touch point size right here on the fly. So if I want to bring these down a bit, if I bring them down too small, it will let me know, just to be careful when you're doing that. It's not a hard stop, but it will remind you. And you can actually click on these to bring up articles about these touch point sizes and things like that. So we'll leave that at about 0.4, click apply, and that's it. So 9 times out of 10, that's what only thing you're going to be adjusting with the supports. A lot of the settings in here are actually based for the auto-generated supports. So whether you want these little mini rafts or the full raft, as we saw earlier, whether you want the label on it, you can turn that on or off. The density of supports, so if you still want to use auto supports, but it's just kind of putting way too many on the model, you can bring the density down, and also the touch size. Internal supports is not something that we deal with too often in jewelry. That's for if you're going to be printing large hollow objects, you have the ability to actually add supports inside that model. Like I said, we don't really use that very much in jewelry, but that's there if you need it, and it will automatically generate them. And then there's some advanced settings. Play with these at your leisure. There's also a help article on knowing what everything does. I really haven't messed with all of these all that much. Didn't really have a need to. Those are there if you want to use them. You really don't have to. All of the supporting that we've been doing as far as going into edit, adding the locations of your supports, adding the touch point size, and clicking apply is pretty much all you're going to have to do when you're supporting within PreForm. If you're using another kind of software for your 3D printer, all the stuff that we've been talking about will apply to that as well. So that's pretty much it. Just kind of a crash course on where to add supports, some tips and tricks. Remember, if you're printing something and you've got sections that are missing, go back and add more supports in that area. Eventually, you'll start to look at a model and you can almost imagine in your head what areas you're going to need more supports. And in really highly detailed models, that's going to be really important to kind of get that idea in your head. Having this little slider here is a beautiful addition to be able to see it in real time and find those little overhangs that you may not have seen the first time. And if you have everything supported the way you should and it's still just not coming out right, maybe you've still got some weirdness on the model, try a change of orientation. Turn it a little bit, maybe angle it somewhere between 30 degrees, 45 degrees, and then add your supports again. Give that a try. In a lot of cases, that really does help. As far as printing flat things, test your printer to see how things are going to come out. But if you're seeing kind of a nasty little surface on the bottom there, then you might actually try to change the orientation a bit, lift it off the platform. And one of the nice parts about a change of orientation in some cases, especially with something like this ring, you're going to lower your print times because you're not having to print so tall anymore. Because if I'm printing this, then I'm going to a much higher level than if I'm printing something like that. So I'm saving a bit of time with my prints just with a change of orientation. If you have any questions about supporting or PreForm or even the Form 3 printers, feel free to give us a call.